We have to get better at paying attention to the signals, the signs, the data as it materializes, so that we can get out in front of it. We ought to spend more time thinking about what's next as opposed to talking about what's already happened. Get smarter about data, get analytical, start running some numbers, start doing some analysis, start creating some predictive trends, pay attention to stuff daily.
We have the pleasure of welcoming Charlie, Judy today to our interview series. I'm Ashwarya Jain from the peopleHum team. Before we begin, just a quick introduction of peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM, that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and video channel, which receives upwards of 200,000 visitors a year, and publish around 2 interviews with well-known names globally every month. And now for our guest. Charlie is the Chief People Officer at Intelligent Medical Objects and has forged a successful career over 2 decades as an HR executive with some of the world's most prominent professional services organizations. He has traversed the global economy while living and working in Chicago, New Orleans, New York, St. Louis, Brussels, Belgium, and Hyderabad in India. He's a renowned blogger with a penchant for disrupting the management norms to which we've fallen prey, and he's a sought-after expert on simplifying human resources. Charlie also believes the future of work is not about better HR systems, technologies, or the next shiny object. It's not about any one best practice, secret recipe, or magic formula. Welcome, Charlie. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. Really glad to be here.
It's our pleasure, Charlie. So, Charlie, I want to begin by asking you that you have worked with multiple organizations, both large and small, across the globe. How do you think the concept of culture has evolved over the years?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, it's first of all, it's evolved considerably, and certainly in the last 5 years, definitely last 10 years. And I think, I mean, along that continuum, we used to talk about culture as being just a word. It was kind of a fluffy descriptor for things that I don't think we really quite understood. It might have even been used as a catch-all to describe kind of the workplace. But I don't know that we really took the time to understand it and to define it. In fact, I think until just recently, organizations have been really talking about it in different ways, and certainly defining it in different ways. So I think what's changed maybe most drastically is that organizations have moved from a place where culture was an idea to a place today, and I'm not suggesting all organizations are there yet, but in fact many are, and certainly many more understand why they should get to this point, where culture is actually an operating system. It's actually a central part of, a critical part of how you do business, and that operating system should be managed intentionally, just as we do any other important operating system in our businesses, whether it's our marketing system, our sales system. That it is something which needs tending to, and that requires investment, it requires attention, it requires dedication, it requires resources, it requires measurement, it requires accountability, it requires data, all of the things that you would really ask for any other, or ask from any other operating system in your business. And so I think organizations which have gone beyond kind of paying culture lip service as being something that is important, and nobody would argue with that, to actually getting really intentional about managing culture in your business. I think that's where we're really starting to see the biggest evolution in just the concept at large.
Right. And, what do you think actually triggered this change from what it was before, which was probably, let's say, a very command and control situation, to now a much more fluid, a much more dynamic culture? What do you think triggered this change?
I mean, I think there were a number of things. I don't think it happened by any one impetus necessarily, but I do think that one, generally, I think human beings are constantly adapting, and that's no different in the workplace. We've seen a hockey stick, um, and I don't know if that reference will be relevant to all of your readers, but the rate of, or the volume of change in the workplace has increased dramatically. For probably 100 years, the way that we managed people really didn't change all that much. I mean, it was pretty well established that this is the way that we do business, and this is the way that we treat our people. Um, and then organizations kind of started to catch on that there's something not right with this. How do we do this differently? So I think first of all, the world around us has changed. I think we have a much more diverse and a talented workforce globally than we ever did before, which means that how an organization attracts the right talent to their business is becoming a much more complicated, dynamic game. It's not as simple as offering a paycheck anymore. It's not as simple even as offering perks and benefits. It has to be about offering an experience, and that experience is generated largely by the culture that you've established and that you maintain and that you grow, etc. So I think newer entrants into the workforce have caused us to do this. I think the competitive space has caused us to do this. I think organizations realize that they can no longer compete. Certainly, they can't differentiate on programs and policies anymore. They have to offer something that's deeper than that. And I think that's where the attention to culture and the role that it plays in building a successful workforce is really coming in place.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. That it's just not one factor that contributes to making a better culture. And you also mentioned that there is absolutely no secret recipe to this. And why is it that you say that? It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the days of suggesting that um, a great place to work, quote unquote, is the same kind of place for every single person on this planet. If you really stop and think about that for a second, that's a really ridiculous notion. Um, and there was this craze for a while where, if you made it to a list of organizations that were considered best places to work, that's where you really wanted to go work. And I think those accolades are nice. I think those external sources of recognition are wonderful to have achieved. Even if nothing else, it validates what you already know you're doing well. But it is in no way an indicator that that kind of an organization has the culture, the behaviors, the actions, the values, the beliefs, the words even, that are going to appeal to you, that are going to um, create an environment in which you can thrive. And so what makes one place a great place to work for you is probably different than what makes one place a great place to work for me. And by the way, if you have 300 people in your organization, every individual in that organization has a unique set of, maybe in some ways shared, but a unique set of aspirations, desires, interests, ambitions, working styles, personality. I mean, all of those things. And so the one size fits all approach to culture just doesn't make sense anymore. We have we have got to get smarter about building culture that is that is a, that is really adept and agile enough to speak almost at the individual level to the individual employee. What's important to you? How can our culture provide that to you? Now, that to some degree is the, it's the hidden treasure, the holy grail of the workplace. So, customizing the experience down to the individual level is really challenging to do. But I think I believe that is where we must head. We must get to a place where we can create a different set of experiences to accommodate a different set of interests and a different human being within our own workforce. At least start doing that to a larger degree. And so I think that's all about don't look for a recipe. Don't copy the cool kids. Don't think you can go do what Google or Amazon or Zappos or pick your favorite organization. Don't think that you can just learn what they're doing and copy that. That's not. It's likely not to work for your own workforce, and it's also likely to confuse people. So, how do you really get comfortable with who you are and what works for your organization and what drives your success? If you can get clear on that, then you'll start to attract the kinds of people that are really going to fit within that environment.
Absolutely. So there is no point in copying, the Silicon Valley companies out there for some organization that's not even based out of Silicon Valley, because there might be so many other factors that contribute to cultures and just does not make sense to copy. And when you say that you need to kind of build a culture of, let's say, XYZ factors, what do you believe? There can be two ways. One would be probably that you set the culture for your organization and say that this is ABC, this is our culture. Or do you go bottom up, wherein you ask, you look at the employees and then you derive culture out of it, or kind of understand their behavior and therefore make a culture which is suitable for them? What should be the ideal approach?
There is no one person, one entity, top or bottom, that owns culture in your business. Everybody owns culture in your business. There are obviously people who have a voice and who can certainly help to steer the direction. Can play a role in being a champion for whatever your organization has determined is best for your organization. But every individual has some responsibility for really being stewards to that culture, understanding it, and understanding not only what it is, but understanding why it is, why these things work for us, and then why therefore we need to preserve and manage and protect. And that's not the job of any one person. It's the job of every person. Every time you hire somebody or bring someone new into your organization, your culture evolves a little bit. Every time somebody leaves, your culture evolves a little bit. Every time you spend another day in the office, your culture evolves a little bit. Your culture is constantly, it's an ecosystem. It's living, it's breathing, it's adapting. And the only way that you can make sure that happens in the way that's going to drive success in your business is that if you're all paying attention to it. You can't visit it once a year. Okay, let's see where we are, right? It has got to become a natural extension of literally what you do every day. Now, that's not to say that you just let it happen, right? I mean, you have to have some guardrails. You have to agree that, hey, these things are important to us. And how you identify those things, you can do that in any number of different ways. But I think you have to have some things that you hold out to be true, no matter what's going on in your world. And those things can be guideposts, they can be your true north, they can be whatever it is that you kind of go back to again and again and again. Um, but that's something that you all own.
Right. So it's not about just one person guiding someone, who's kind of like a supervisor of culture. So the notion of chief culture officers, is that farcical? Is that just for?
I think that's great. I think it means that the organization is serious enough, or I think it could mean the organization is serious enough to put culture front and center. Um, you need somebody to facilitate. You need somebody to hold the organization accountable to. You need somebody who's going to give it the appropriate attention. But they can't do that themselves. They've really got to do that collectively with the entire organization.
Right, that makes sense. And also, when you talk about a culture, now there are so many types of people in the culture. Now, the working style of the older generation could be very different as compared to that of the youth today. So, how do you think organizations can work towards bridging those differences to, create a healthy work environment?
Yeah, this is an interesting debate that I think is really still being waged, across the world of work. I think there are some that would argue that the working style of the older generations is really not all that different than the younger generation. Um, I think what's and I think I'm probably one of the people that would make that argument. I don't know that I'm right. I would again remind everybody that those differences in working styles, they may have something to do with age, but they can have those differences can show up in lots of different ways. And for me to suggest that the gap is big between the boomers and the Gen Y Zs in the in the world is really much bigger than any of the other gap. Like, I don't really know that that's true. Um, Keep in mind that the older generation has a lot more experience in the workforce, and they grew up in that environment where the workforce hadn't really changed in 100 years, or the way that we manage people hadn't really changed like. And I'm one of those people, by the way. When I entered the workforce 25 plus years ago, the it was extremely traditional, and so we have that ingrained in our thinking a lot more than others do. Now that we've started to see the realm of possibility, I think everybody's kind of starting to gravitate towards a new norm, so to speak. I think the boomers are as attracted to the new way of working as the Gen Ys and Zs are in making sure that stuff exists. And so we're seeing, all ships rise in a tide, right? I think that's right. But like, that's kind of where we're headed. That whether we're talking about generations, whether we're talking about gender, whether we're talking about race, whether we're talking about socioeconomic background, whether we're talking about geography, I mean, pick your favorite demographic. The importance is to understand that those differences could exist. They could exist, and our organization should be as smart as possible at first identifying those differences, understanding them, and then responding to them to the extent possible.
Absolutely. I think maybe that perspective really opens up a lot of doors in a lot of people's minds as to really, is there a gap between how generations work? And thank you for that insightful answer. And you also believe that management practices should be banished for organizations to truly excel in the future of work. So, do you think there's some specific practice out here that one must follow to understand your insight? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So I want to clarify. I don't know that I believe that management practices, um, as a tool in the workplace, need to be banished. But I do believe that the traditional management practices um, must be banished. And there are certain things about the traditional practices which I think are not only um, you know they're not only um, disruptive, but they're potentially really damaging to I think society's evolution, not just the workplace's evolution. And those are things like the traditional command and control, um, the traditional hierarchies, um, you, you know, uh, the extent to which management cannot get out of the way. Managers need to get out of the way, and I think that could be an interview and a podcast in and of itself. Um, there are lots of challenges to doing that, and there are certainly lots of ways to deal with it. Um, but I think the single biggest issue traditional workplaces face is allowing people who are kind of closest to the problem solve it. Whether irrespective of title, of tenure, we need to get to a place where knowledge and expertise are more important than title and tenure. And that management is there to remove obstacles. Management is there to focus on creating an environment in which their individuals, not just their teams, but the individuals on those teams, can really thrive. That's the role increasingly of management, is making sure each and every individual in the organization is performing at the top of their license, that they are productive, that they are challenged, that they are engaged, that they're learning, that they are advancing, that they are energetic and passionate and connected and affiliated, and all of those things. That's the manager's job. The manager's job is no longer about approving, requisitioning, solving problems necessarily, reviewing stuff. It's about enabling a team. And I think in order for that to happen, the manager needs to learn to get the heck out of the way.
Absolutely, that makes so much sense. And in all of this, in building a great employee experience, a great culture, what is the role of technology, and to what extent is technology an enabler?
Well, I mean, it first and foremost, I mean, it is technology is our lives today. It is at our fingertips. It is literally at our fingertips. Um, it has become so pervasive and so really so crucial to everything that we do in the workplace. But it has to be a facilitator. It cannot be an inhibitor. We cannot implement technology for the sake of technology. We cannot we cannot make the mistake of going to a technology as a solution and not thinking about the behaviors that are still really crucial from the human beings and the employees that will be using that technology. Example, if your organization feels like you're struggling with providing meaningful feedback to your employees, that your performance management cycle is less than desirable. Going out and finding a performance management system, the new flashy shiny thing, and plugging it in and turning it on is not going to fix feedback in your organization. You still need to empower your people, to train them, to equip them to get better at delivering feedback. That tool may help, it may facilitate, but it will not solve. And I think that's the same for any technology we talk about in the workplace. The other thing that I think technologies are really important for is that they should eliminate distractions. They should automate as much as we possibly can in the workplace, not to eliminate the human being, but so that the human being can be a human being, and so that we can focus more on developing and paving the path for that human being, as opposed to they're having to deal with these obstacles, these frustrations, these distractions, etc. If you can use technology to get rid of the stuff that doesn't add a lot of value but still needs to get done, then you're using it the right way, and it allows you then to focus on the human.
Yes, completely agree with you there, Charlie. And I think, that's where the future of work is going. And, we're seeing a lot of remote working, and a lot of people who might actually work from home even after, this whole situation of the pandemic is over. So do you think that's going to be a challenge with respect to maintaining the organization's culture? And is there something that leaders or managers should take care of?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, it is clear that this pandemic will change, all aspects of our lives, and the workplace, of course, is maybe one of the most significant. I still believe pretty strongly that change will be for the better. I think that this is forcing us to confront some challenges that have existed for a long time, but we've been unwilling or unable or just reticent to confront. I mean, even just stuff as simple as working remotely. Any discomfort or a lot of the discomfort that existed before all of this around whether or not we can be successful working remotely, and obviously I'm not talking about every industry, but many an industry, I think all of that's going to be eliminated or certainly mitigated. People now can say, yeah, okay, now I get it. I see how it works, right? And so I think that's going to be a lot more natural for us. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't need to manage it and we don't need to be thinking about it. But like here, culture still exists. You're just looking at it through a different lens now, right? You have to consider some different things. It's interesting. We have a what we call a culture council, which is a group of cross-functional people in our organization, all levels, about 10 people in total, who are kind of collectively charged with being stewards for the culture and IMO's business, and that's all about understanding what things are important to us and which things need attention, and kind of making sure that the right things are getting focused on. And we were having we had a meeting earlier this week or maybe late last week, can't remember, but anyway, we were talking about all of the things that we'd kind of had on our list before all of this happened, and we were revisiting that list, and we were kind of all saying, you know what, these things all are still really relevant. We just have to think about them a little bit differently. We just have to change the way that we're either going to respond to or we're going to evaluate the challenge around. But the dynamic, the cultural dynamic, is still important. It's just taken on a different light. And so I think the real challenge for organizations will be to start with, this is not about having a different culture. This is not about having to blow stuff up and start from scratch. It's about how do you adapt it to the new way of working. It's not necessarily about becoming something different. It's about applying who you already are to a new environment.
Right, that'll be an interesting challenge to solve, I think, and it'll be interesting how this unfolds. And you're absolutely right. It's about being dynamic rather than starting from scratch, because that would just be really, really complex to do and does not even make that much sense. So thank you for that. And to wrap the interview up, I'm going to ask you the last question, which is if you have any other important sound bites that you'd like to leave our viewers with.
Oh, geez. Let's see. Let's see. The other thing that I would say is I think HR leaders, people leaders, talent leaders, should increasingly um, pay attention to data. We don't. We historically are not great at getting kind of meaningful, empirical, reliable data on our people. And I don't mean data like the stuff that would go into your HRIS. All of that stuff is really important, or your HCM. All of that stuff is extremely important. But data around what people are really experiencing. I think we all too often make assumptions, or we listen to the one or two people that seem to have the loudest voice, or we apply what our gut tells us. And what we're not good at doing is really paying attention to the signals, the signs, really as the culture evolves. Even just think about the evolution of employee surveys. There used to be this point where you did a survey once a year. Well, great. There were 365 days between those two bookends. What happened each of those days? What were you doing about it? How are you paying attention to it? How are you getting out in front of it? And I think those are questions that most organizations really struggle with answering. We have to get better at paying attention to the signals, the signs, the data as it materializes, so that we can get out in front of it. We ought to spend more time thinking about what's next as opposed to talking about what's already happened. And I think data can help us do that. I would really encourage everybody who's thinking about things that they can do in their own HR practice. Get smarter about data. Get analytical. Start running some numbers. Start doing some analysis. Start creating some predictive trends. Pay attention to stuff daily. And that's much easier for me to say than it is for anybody to do, but I'd encourage people to think about it.
Absolutely. Data will help you connect the dots, and rather than being intuitive, it's better to rely on something which is robust and more solid. And I think data can do that for you. So thank you so much for that. And I had a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your views with us. I really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Charlie, and take care. Have a healthy time ahead of you.
Appreciate it. You too.
Bye bye.